I used to read this picture book called I Don't Want to Go to Bed as a child. I remember it went something like this. The clock strikes 9. Who's still awake? Black cats, mischievous little mice, thieves. But nighttime is the ghost's time. So why are you still playing at this hour? Do you want to be a ghost? The ghost will grab you up and fly you away to go up to Ghostland through the starry night sky. I met a real ghost when I was a child. At least, that's what I thought. I lived on the 5th floor of an apartment block. I remember waking up bleary-eyed one night. Something was tapping against the glass balcony door. I could hear someone calling my name from the other side of the glass. "Come and play," someone said. In my imagination, it was just like one of the characters from my picture book. I thought, like in the book, that ghost wanted to take me away, so I whispered, "No, I can't come and play." Only a few nights later, the ghost came back. Only that night, my parents had left the window open because it was so hot out. There was an insect screen between my room and the outside. Just as the night before, I heard that same voice call my name and ask me to come play with them. Again, I refused, but this time the ghost became angry. I was scared. I remember turning away from the window and trying to just ignore it. I think I might have felt so pressured in that moment. I might have said something like, "Come again tomorrow, I just can't play tonight." Then I heard the insect screen being forced open, and something entered my room. I thought I was about to be taken away, just like in my bedtime story. I jumped up and ran as fast as I could into my parents' bedroom. I grabbed my father's hand and tried to wake him up. "Come here, come and play." I heard it coming from my bedroom. It was such a commanding voice. My father woke up and sped into my room. I heard him scream, "Get out," and since then, I didn't see the ghost anymore. Now for the facts, though. I know what happened now, and I'm not a little kid anymore. Before my dad married my mother, he had an affair with another woman. That woman had climbed up 5 stories of balconies to get to our apartment. When my dad rushed into my bedroom to see what was going on, she was there. She went crazy and started smashing everything in our family home. My dad had to restrain her until the police arrived. He even had to force her down and tie her up with duct tape. My dad said the look the woman was giving him was an intense stare of hatred that still haunts him to this very day. This all happened when I was about 4 years old, mind you. Every time I tried to ask about what happened or anything about that ghost from my picture book, my parents would always scold me and ask me to stop bringing it up. My mother was pregnant at the time. I can't imagine the stress that put her under. I'm an adult now, but sometimes in the heat of the summer, I'm reluctant to open my windows, and sometimes, just as I'm drifting off to sleep, I feel as if I'm going to hear that familiar tapping at my window once again. I can't recall many fond childhood memories, and I can't erase that one either. When I was in university, I had a good friend who was good looking, but never really had a boyfriend or showed any interest in men. I was very curious about why, so I asked her the reason. She said there were 2, really. She told me that she'd had a boyfriend in high school who became completely obsessed with her. When she couldn't take it any longer, she spoke to him about mutually ending the relationship. He exploded with rage and attacked her. The second reason was before university, she commuted to school on the train. One day, she found something in her bag, a mysterious sealed envelope. She guessed that someone must have slipped it into her bag on board the crowded train. Inside was a letter that was very simple. It only had a few words. Love at first sight. It was a creepy kind of love letter. It wasn't addressed to her, it didn't have her name written on the envelope or anything, so it really creeped her out. And from thereafter, she found a new letter in her bag each week. She said she didn't do anything to encourage these letters. Since this freaked her out so much, she decided to stop traveling to school on the train. A few days after she stopped commuting, she received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. She didn't answer the call. She saved the number as stalker ? A few days passed by, and she set up her answering machine service to see if the stalker would try and leave a message at all. She was surprised to find that they in fact had. Her hands were shaking as she listened to what this person said. "Why did you go away? Why did you leave me?" She began to develop a fear of leaving the house and a fear of men. It took her years to recover from that fear instilled in her, not only from her ex-boyfriend, but also from the mysterious train stalker. When she had some confidence back, she decided to go back to university. I wanted to help her get a sense of trust in men again, as there are many good men out there. I knew I was meddling a bit, but I wanted to help her. So I thought I would invite her to a party with men and women both attending. I floated the idea to her, and she reluctantly accepted. The day of the party arrived, and I invited some of my best friends. I made sure the men were all male friends that I trusted, and warned them all that my friend was nervous. I asked them to be on their best behavior. My friends all understood, and promised to make the atmosphere great for everybody. The party was held by our college mentor. I was so proud of her. She spoke to men for the first time in a long while. They had a lengthy conversation, and it was great to see. The guy she spoke to had the exact same taste in music and movies as she did, to the point where they even had the same favorite song. They even came from the same area. They could have talked all night. There was so much in common. I felt like it was fate these two had been brought together. When the party was over, he asked her for her contact information. I knew this would be a big step for her. I could tell she was happy about this, but she was too shy to show it. She pulled me over to the side after the party ended on the way home. "I'm so happy. I feel like I can fall in love again like anyone else now." I was so happy for her. I felt just as excited as she did. A couple of days later, she received an email from him. She was pleased, as you can imagine. I respected him for trying to take things slowly as well. After about a week or so of emailing back and forth, she came running into my room to tell me that he had invited her out on a date. The day of the date arrived, and my friend didn't want to be late. She left home with plenty of time to spare. He sent an email saying, "I'll be there shortly. I'll let you know when I arrive." My friend decided to wait in a cafe for him. The cafe was crowded, so she emailed him with her number and asked him to call her when he got there. After about 15 minutes, her phone rang. At first, she was excited, but as she pulled out her phone, the stalker ? Contact was displayed on the screen. Her heartbeat rose. Old familiar thoughts of fear crept forward from the back of her mind. She calmed herself down, though, and tried to tell herself that she was okay. After all, she was in a public space with friends around. "I'll be safe," she thought. She decided to be brave and answer the phone. "Hello? Hi, I'm here. Where are you?" It was the voice of the man she'd met at the party. Her new boyfriend. No mistake. He must have been the one who put the letters in her bag on the train. She called me as she was leaving. All she said was that she had no luck with men. She ran away and escaped that letter stalker with the help of her friends and colleagues. I don't know what they did, but they did make him back off. I'm so shocked by those events. I'm somewhat in awe of the sheer obsession and persistence of stalkers with their victims. I just wish he had left her alone. I was in the PTA at my son's school. It was great. Everyone was so nice and friendly. I was chatting with some of the other moms about the PTA's activities and quickly became friends with one mom in particular. We went to the cinema, had lunch together, and before long we had created a close-knit friendship. We formed a group with some other moms, and we would ask each other questions and chat about our children's grades. Some of us would even boast about how well our children were doing. It was always a conversation subject. My child has always been a motivated studier, but he didn't study as much as my new friend's son. Because of this, I was not as interested as she was in chatting about the grades. Time went on, and our children were set to go to high school. We had examinations coming up, so I decided to sign my son up for some private classes at a cram school nearby. Don't worry, he wanted to go there too. My son did so well on his tests actually, that he got offers from all the best schools in the area. I was very proud, but I didn't want to discuss this with my friends. I didn't want the other moms to feel bad or get jealous. Plus, I was starting to feel like this wasn't much of anyone else's business anyways. In these sorts of circles, people can get very envious, and friendships can get ruined in a snap. One day, it started. Someone started messing with our home. At first, I thought it was just some kids playing pranks, but after a while, it started to turn more sinister. Someone filled up my mailbox with garbage. Someone threw meat all over the side of my house. Someone had crossed my name out on my post and wrote "died" in its place. It was very frustrating for me, but more than anything else, it was frightening. I was incredibly anxious, and I couldn't sleep well during this period. I had no idea what was about to happen next, though. What kind of thing would this person do? My husband said we should go to the police, but I felt as if that would be a waste of police time. After all, we had nothing to identify the culprit with. We decided to install some security cameras to see who was doing this to us. One morning, I went out to get the mail, where I found a knife stabbed through our mailbox. It was terrifying. I went to check the surveillance camera footage, and I was shocked at what I saw. There was my friend, the mother from the PTA. She was the one who was doing these horrible things to us. I didn't think she would be capable of doing things like that. I thought we were friends. At first, I didn't know what to do about this situation. I was so lost. Eventually, I decided to go to her directly and show her the footage evidence. It was then that she said something very unexpected and chilling. I asked her why she was doing this to me and my family. Because your child is performing better than mine. I didn't know how she found out about my son's grades. I never bragged or posted about it or anything. I think her son may have been asking my son for his test scores or something to study with. It transpired that her plan was to drive us out of the area so that her son could become the best student around town. Since then, I cut all ties with that so-called friend. I'll never speak to her again. This one-upsmanship culture, this boasting and putting others down, it's a terrible thing to get involved with. These circles of people can seem very friendly, but deep down they're very bitter and horrid. I have no idea what she might have done to my family if we hadn't caught her red-handed. Stay safe out there, please. I work part-time at a gas station in my city. Well, it's more on the edge of the city near the suburbs. Overall, it's just a very typical gas station though. It's not super creepy or isolated or anything like that. I only really chose to work here though because rent prices were going up, and my other job wasn't really cutting it. The only shift I could do to work around my other schedule was overnight. Gas stations are one of the few places offering those sorts of shifts anyway. This was just 10 months ago. It was pretty cold out this night, and there was some snow on the ground still from a heavy downfall a few days ago. Other than that though, the night was going pretty typical. Being in the suburbs, there's not exactly a whole lot of traffic going around the gas station. It's mostly just a couple of cars passing by every once in a while. By 12 o'clock, only a handful of cars were coming into the gas station every hour. After a bit, I got bored enough to leave the front desk and walk around the shop, rearranging the items on the shelves to look nice. It was just a couple of minutes after I started doing this that I heard the door open. I turned around and saw a man walking in, right up to the front desk. He leaned over the counter and looked both ways, as if he were looking for someone to help him. "Can I help you with something, sir?" I said, as I made my way back to the counter. The man turned and looked at me, almost as if I'd scared him. Then he hesitated a bit, before saying, "No, I'm good." He walked out of the store. It was fairly obvious he did need help with something, but seeing that made me quickly think of the possible robbery he was plotting. I did work at a gas station after all, so it was kind of always in the back of my mind. I watched the guy go outside and into a car that was parked in a very strange spot. It was kind of near the pumps, but not actually in the parking section. He got in and just drove away. I had no way to tell if he was actually planning something, but all the signs pointed to it. I figured maybe being behind him when he walked in and not at the counter threw him off enough, and that somehow was able to deter him. Whatever happened, I was confident after a few minutes of thinking that this had definitely been an attempted robbery. I called the police to report it, just in case they were going to try a different gas station. They said an officer would come by in a couple of minutes to get a report. I hung up and waited, but not even a minute later, that same car pulled back into the parking lot. They went right into the spot they had parked before, then just waited there with the car on. I was positive I could see movement in the front seats, like there were at least 2 people inside. I quickly locked the front doors and prepared myself for what could soon happen. As I continued looking out the window, though, the car just stayed there idling. Nobody got out, like they were watching or waiting for the perfect moment. Luckily, though, the cops pulled in and immediately recognized the car as I described it. They pulled in right behind it, blocking them in. Surprisingly, there wasn't actually all that much of a scene. The officer pretty much just walked up and pulled out 2 men, one of which was the guy who had come in earlier. I guess they were trying to play it off like they weren't doing anything, but that didn't really work out well for them. While it seemed to be straightforward, what they had in their car showed a different and more disturbing possibility. In the trunk, there was a stash of weapons, along with the rope, tape, and an assortment of similar items. Both men are currently behind bars, but I still feel almost traumatized after discovering what they had in the car. If I hadn't reported them after that first strange interaction, I would have been through far worse than just being robbed, and possibly would have never been seen again after that night. A couple of weeks ago, my friends and I were hanging out after a day at school. I'll call them G, D, and E. We usually hang out often, but what was different about this day was it was so damn hot. We weren't exactly used to being hot where we live. We wanted to go and get some drinks and snacks, but from the park where we were hanging out, it was about an hour away. We decided it would be smart to go to one of the most sketchy 7-Elevens that exist in our town. We all grabbed our snacks and walked out of the 7-Eleven. They had one table right in front of the store. It was right next to the parking lot. I realized at some point a car had pulled up to the space right next to us. It wasn't that big of a deal because there were only like 7 parking spots. Of course, I didn't think anything of it at first. D and G kept dancing, while E and I were just talking and eating chips. One thing to mention is that D's parents smoke in their apartment all the time, and it's really messed up D's lungs, so they can't really do stuff such as dancing without needing to stop and take deep breaths often. I saw that G was looking at something and seemed a bit off. I just figured they were zoning out or something. Well, G and D looked over at me and said, "Should we tell him?" Of course, I was confused by this. What exactly did they want to tell me? G then started walking to me and then whispered in my ear, "Those people in the truck are recording us." To give you a shittily made layout, the truck was parked right in front of the door to the 7-Eleven and right next to us. At the circle table where we were sitting at, I was sitting with my back to the truck. E was sitting on the right side of me, D was sitting on the left, and G was sitting right across. There was a small park behind where we were sitting, but there was a wood wall around it. I immediately grabbed up all my stuff, stood up, and then walked over to a corner, all while G told E what was going on. A man and woman got out of the truck, and we expected them to try and get us to follow them or something. Instead, they just went into the 7-Eleven. We took this as a chance to run to the park that was behind us, but since we aren't dumb, we actually took a picture of their license plate beforehand. Once we got to the park, we were all breathing really heavily, except for E. They were actually shaking and crying instead. I started asking how long they'd been recording us for. She said they'd been watching us for about 5 minutes. I instantly knew that if they were doing it for that long, they were most likely recording us because we were young girls. The people in the truck did look high, but it didn't really help much. Especially after we decided to look up the license plate and realized they were local to the area. So yeah, that's wonderful. Of course, G had to go as soon as this happened. That left me, D, and E all alone. We were trying to calm down a bit, but we couldn't really do much. Of course, D and I both have very bad anxiety, so we were shaking. I also have a history of passing out when I get scared, so I started getting dizzy. I knew I had to go. I knew the man and woman that were recording us didn't actually do anything to us, but it's still creepy as hell to think about what could have happened and how much worse it could have gotten. I'm just glad we all decided to get the hell out of there when we did, or who knows what else could have happened. So, for a little bit of background, I'm a married 21-year-old woman. I'm a pretty small person, and I live in one of the most unsafe towns in North Carolina. I also have 2 dogs, a large bully mix and a medium-sized lab/border collie mix. It's important to know that I live at the very end of my street, right in front of a section of woods. This happened about a month ago. It was around 6 o'clock at night, and my husband was working a 24-hour shift, leaving me home alone with our 2 dogs. Typically, our dogs are pretty quiet, and they don't bark unless someone's literally right up on our front porch. This particular evening, I was on the couch watching some TV when my dogs just suddenly started losing their minds. They were both growling and lunging at the front windows, then running to my sliding glass back door and doing the same thing. I instantly had a bad feeling. I checked the cameras and they didn't seem to have picked up any movement though. I brushed it off as being paranoid since I was home all alone. After about 10 minutes though, the dogs still had not settled down at all. I decided to let them into the backyard. As soon as I did so, my smaller dog took off running towards the side of my fence obscured by trees. My larger dog stayed next to me, still growling and snarling. I had heard my fence shaking, so I ran over and saw my smaller dog attacking the fence. What looked like a woman's tennis shoe was stuck in the mud off in the trees. Again, I almost dismissed it. I was pretty annoyed because teenagers are known to have bonfires and such back there. I figured that's where the shoe had come from. On top of that, I'm normally a pretty paranoid person anyway. I got the dogs back inside and didn't really think much of it until the next night when my husband was home. It was around 9 p.m. or so when someone knocked on the door. My husband looked out the windows all around the front of the house, and he noticed a small teenage girl standing on our porch. She looked to be the same age as our neighbor's daughter's friends. Said neighbor had a lot of health issues, so we assumed that something must have happened to them. My husband, being a bit of a paranoid person himself, grabbed his weapon and held it behind the door while he opened it. I was in the hallway just out of view, holding onto my dogs who were again growling and trying to lunge. It's important to know they've never acted that way towards a person. As my husband was talking to this woman, I had heard her ask him about his age, where he went to school, and if we had children as well. He declined to answer any of the questions. Then she asked the creepiest one yet. She asked if any of our neighbors had kids, if there were any bachelors or child-free couples she should avoid. My husband just said he couldn't help her and shut the door in her face. After that, we actually heard her start cackling, then say, "So you really don't know?" before she then walked away. We decided that was really sketchy, and we needed to at least call the non-emergency line. While I was doing so, my husband was watching our cameras. He showed me as this woman walked around our house and tried to look in through our windows. When she triggered our motion sensor light, I thought I would vomit. The shoes she had on were identical to the ones I had seen outside my fence the day before. I made a report, but nothing ever came of it that I know of. I had later learned that this woman had also gone to 2 other houses that same night. Both were single women with small children. After I heard that they had kids, I remembered that the previous day, the kids my neighbor babysat had been playing in my front yard. It seems very likely this woman was out looking for children that night, which is absolutely terrifying in and of itself. I'm a 26-year-old woman, and at the time this story takes place, I was a broke college student. I was very naive and a chronic people pleaser. I avoided confrontation at all costs. One night, I was waiting on the bus home after visiting some friends. It wasn't very late at night, only about 7 p.m. on a weeknight. I was tired and I was really looking forward to getting home to unwind and relax. I'd been at this bus stop loads of times, and I often encountered some familiar faces while waiting. This time, though, it seemed to just be me. I popped my headphones in and listened to some music while I waited. I messed around on my phone, keeping a close eye on the time. The bus was due at 20 past, and I'd only been there for about 5 minutes. That's when I sensed someone near me. I glanced over to my side and saw a man around my age had silently come underneath the shelter with me. I ignored him and continued looking at my phone. Suddenly, though, I heard someone loudly call out to me, "Hey, excuse me!" I turned to see the man was right next to me, staring down at me. I took out my headphone and asked him what he wanted. He grinned at me before asking what time the bus was coming. I told him it was usually around 20 past the hour, then looked down at my phone again, hoping he'd get the hint that I didn't want to have a long conversation. Sadly, he did not. I could sense him still staring at me, and when I looked at him, he didn't look away at all. I smiled awkwardly, which looking back, I wish I hadn't done this, because it probably only encouraged him. Like I said though, I was a really huge people pleaser back then, and to be blunt, I was an idiot. It seemed like out of nowhere that he started trying to talk to me again. He asked if I took this bus often, to which I responded yes, and again gave a tight smile at him, willing him to just go away and leave me alone. I knew immediately I shouldn't have admitted I took this bus regularly, because now he could determine my schedule if he really wanted to. He started complimenting me. "My, you have such gorgeous skin," he told me, which I found to be a bit of an odd compliment. I continued smiling and trying to focus on my phone. By now, I had turned my music off, but I kept my headphones in to give the impression that I was trying to ignore him. I knew I needed to be able to hear him perfectly, though, because he was being so weird and creepy. I felt uncomfortable. When the bus came, I was relieved, even though he got on with me. It wasn't exactly packed, but we also weren't alone either. I thought surely he would leave me alone now. I was so wrong. I sat at the front, and to my discomfort, he sat directly across from me. I was sitting in these fold-down seats, usually reserved for people with prims or wheelchairs. I wanted to be closer to the front, as I felt very uncomfortable. He sat on those same seats directly opposite me. When the bus started, he didn't say anything. He just kept staring at me. Eventually, he started asking me over the engine noise what stop I got off at. I politely informed him that wasn't any of his business, but my heart was pounding in my chest. I was texting a friend what was happening, and I also texted some of my family members just to let them know of the situation too. I was feeling so uneasy, and it was only getting worse. He told me that he wanted to walk me home, and that he could come over to my place and show me a good time. I was disgusted by him. He was leering at me, and kept talking over and over again about my skin. "You know, you have such good skin. I want to stroke it so badly. I love girls with nice skin like yours. I bet you have even more that I can't see." I was so disgusted by his comments. I felt angry. I was getting angrier at myself being so scared that I couldn't bring myself to just tell him to fuck off. And this went on for a bit, before the bus driver stopped the bus and got out of his seat. He approached the man and demanded he get off immediately. He must have heard what the man was saying, as he was talking quite loudly. The man began to protest, and even had the audacity to say that he was my boyfriend. The bus driver looked at me before shaking his head at the man, then demanding he get off right now. He informed the guy that if he refused to comply, there would be some real trouble. The man begrudgingly slinked off the bus, glaring at the bus driver. Glaring at both of us. The bus driver then asked me if I was okay. I just broke down. He asked me if I had any friends or family I could call to meet me when I got off the bus. I told him I could call someone. He nodded before telling me he'd overheard the man being creepy a few times and decided to intervene. He had 2 daughters himself, and if one of them were me, he'd really want someone to intervene to protect them too. He went back to driving. I called one of my friends. No one else on the bus did anything. There were about 4 people all around my age, but they just stared at me uncomfortably. I don't know if they felt guilty or maybe called out by the bus driver, but none of them did a single thing. To be fair, maybe they didn't hear or notice anything was amiss, but still, it's scary to know I was so close to these people, and I was still preyed upon by some weirdo. When it was my stop to get off, I kept thanking the driver for helping me. He told me not to worry and to stay safe. I didn't live far from the bus stop that I got dropped off at, and I remained on the phone with my friend until I was finally home with the door locked. I avoided that bus stop from that day forward, always opting to get a taxi home instead. I never saw the creepy man again, and I hope I never will. We've all had traumatic things happen to us in life. Some are much more serious than others. When I was in high school, something traumatic and horrifying happened to me when I stayed overnight at one of my buddy's houses. His parents were going out of town on Saturday night to celebrate their anniversary. He invited me over to just kind of kick it and hang out for the night so he wouldn't be alone. We did invite a few other people over as well and played some games. Ultimately though, everyone left around 11 or so. He and I hung out for a little while longer, but then decided to lie down. At around 2 in the morning, we were dozing off watching The Office when we heard a loud bang from downstairs. I thought it sounded like it was the door, but my friend said they thought it was a neighbor and to just ignore it. He was pretty tired at that moment. We were both on the verge of sleeping, so we didn't react much at first. Maybe it really was just the neighbor. I mean, it could have even been a bird hitting the house or something. Just as we'd convinced ourselves it was nothing to worry about, the knocks at the door started almost in a perfect rhythm. The bangs on the door echoed throughout the house. We had no idea at that moment what to do. This was clearly not a neighbor's problem. This was our real life, and there was someone knocking on the door at 2 in the morning. Every couple of seconds, the knocks would come again. Sometimes they were much harder, and sometimes they were so light you almost couldn't hear them. It didn't matter what type of knock it was though. Just the thought of someone standing out there at this hour was enough to scare us both out of our wits. We snuck over to one of the windows so we could catch a glimpse of the knocking person. To our surprise, it was just a normal-looking man. He didn't look like some addict or criminal or even sketchy at all. He literally looked like a completely normal guy you'd just see walking around outside. He was wearing a nice pair of sneakers, jeans, and a nice Nike polo shirt. You might have even mistaken in thinking this guy was going golfing or something. Not exactly a scary individual, but it was just so weird. Given the time, we both looked at each other in confusion, trying to process what was happening and to think of the correct way to handle this situation. He really started to bang on the door now. We jumped down. Remember, this was 2 in the morning. So this could have been a Girl Scout selling cookies and it would have been unsettling. I was watching out the window while my friend was trying to call his parents to find out what to do. He was unsuccessful, but he kept on trying. He wasn't smart enough to call the hotel or wherever they were staying. The guy finally just walked away. The relief was short-lived though. Maybe 30 seconds later, he returned and taped some sort of note onto the front door. He didn't knock or anything this time, just left the note and sat on the front steps for about 5 minutes, then walked away. I kept looking outside, but I couldn't see him. We both decided that whoever this character was, he had to have been gone by now. My friend went to unlock the door, and I yelled at him to stop. He told me the guy was surely long gone, and I had nothing to worry about anymore. He wanted to know what the note said. I'm not going to lie, I wanted to know what it said too. Well, my friend had just opened the door and grabbed the note. As he was pulling the tape off the door, we heard a loud bellowing voice from the distance. "Hey, you!" We both froze and looked up. The knocking man came out of the bushes from across the street and started to charge right at the front door. We both screamed as we slammed it shut. Another large man emerged from the bushes nearby and followed the man from earlier. My buddy slammed the door and was fortunate enough to get it locked before they reached it. Both men started to pound on it, not knocking at all. I looked out the window and saw the larger man who wasn't out there originally was slamming his shoulder into the door. The bangs against it were unrelenting. We started to fear the worst. Finally, my friend called the police, and the guys outside must have heard what we were saying. They fled instantly. The police showed up and thankfully were able to get a hold of my friend's parents. They came home immediately. The worst part about all of this was the note that had been taped to the door. It was a very violent and detailed note about being at the house to pick up the money. I remember it saying something like no more running around, no more excuses, and a bunch of other things like that. The note was signed with some name like Leroy. His dad, of course, denied everything and claimed and swore up and down he had no idea who this Leroy character was, nor what money he was talking about. I remember it being very weird and uncomfortable around his family for a while, until it was all sort of forgotten about. My friend and I never forgot about that night though, and we still talk about it to this day. I wondered to myself all the time, was his dad secretly up to something? I mean, the note was addressed to him specifically by name. They knew where he lived, and after that night, nothing ever happened again. It just seems so weird, but I guess I don't know enough about the seedy underbelly of society to know if this is normal or not. We never got any more closure on that night, and trust me, I tried. We pestered his dad for an hour trying to get information, and he just kind of rolled his eyes, saying it must have been some weirdo playing a prank. Maybe, but whatever it was a horrible night, and a horrible memory I'll always remember. To this day, I still don't like being home alone.